Okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks again to Rachel and company for arranging for the food. Much appreciated. I think this does actually make quite a big difference, not just in blood sugar, but in thank you. Not just a difference in blood sugar, but a difference, I think, in creating a kind of sense of solidarity and community. So thank you. So welcome to the second part of the two-part theater performance. Dr. Patrick Boyle has been a professor of jazz studies at the School of Music at UVic since 2016, teaching courses in music business, theory, history, pedagogy, and performance. He earned his PhD in music from the U of T, an MA in musicology from York University, and a BA in performance from Memorial University. He has a long list of commercial releases, including Lull in 2021 and Swivel in 2020. In addition to teaching and performing, Patrick writes for theater, film, and concert stage. Among his many commissions is a score for the 2017 theatrical adaptation of the Wayne Johnston novel, Colony of Unrequited Dreams. At the CSRS, he's been working on a project related to improvisation, and he has taught us all to appreciate the ways in which our ordinary, as well as the more formal interactions, have much in common with improvisation that is, of course, the cornerstone of modern jazz music. So please join me in welcoming Patrick Boyle.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. What a great pleasure and privilege it is to be here. Please grab some food while I'm talking. I take no offense. I've played lots of gigs in my life, and really this is one of the nicer ones I've ever had. So I'd like to start earlier in the year. I forget which speaker offered a benediction, but I thought it was a fantastic idea. So I want to dedicate this offering today to anyone, past or present, who has had to leave their home against their will in order to stay alive. And here at UVic, it's the last day of class. You can probably feel the energy all the way on Zoom. But I was dealing with some students today who are graduating, very excited, brand new music graduates. And I just want to instill to them and everyone else really, just how important it is to have places where we can share art and ideas now. It's extremely important. And I think young people need to hear that even more than we think. So it's been a great day for that. And I also want to just say, building upon Estraven, which was just a fantastic presentation. I'm so excited to get to know you even better. This is a special place. This CSRS is so nourishing. I think it's rare. This place is certainly rare. It's rare, but it's too rare. It's unfortunately too rare a place. I think institutions everywhere would gain a great deal by engaging this power of consistent contact and a focus on relationships. Where guards can be let down. It's very exciting. I'm really lucky to work at a university, very privileged position. But I don't think it's discussed enough how siloed and impersonal this place can be. And so to have an outlet like this, it's more than an outlet. It's a place where sharing is allowed. And I mean that really as a place where things can be received. And that's what I feel so privileged to be around, this fellowship, creativity, and openness. It's been a great time, a real highlight of my life, I would say. Oh, pardon me. That was not a highlight of my life. The title of my presentation today and my project is Nowhere to Now Here. And that's inspired by this gentleman, John Wire, a dear mentor of mine. John was principal timpanist of the Toronto Symphony and the Boston Symphony Orchestras, but also, and perhaps most famously, a member of Nexus, the world's most important percussion ensemble. If you've ever heard the music of Steve Reich, you've heard Russell Hartenberger, you've heard John Wire, a real important figure. And he spent the last years of his life in Newfoundland, where I'm from. So I got to know John quite well. And John published a book in 2002 called Touched by Sound that had this poem in it that has been so important to my life. O sacred sound, what I have found, within your care, within your ear, the stillness there to be aware of what was always here. You've carried me from nowhere to now here. I've just always taken that with me ever since I first heard about it. And I definitely think there's probably some people at CSRS who are probably wondering, what are you doing? So on these coffee talks, it's like, you get the introduction, like, oh yeah, I'm Patrick Boyle. My area of interest is improvisation. I just vaguely tiptoe around any sort of specificity. Well, today's the day. It's because I'm a little afraid of specificity as an improviser, to be honest. I don't like to necessarily be too locked in, but today I will tell you and show you some of my project. My project is a 4-episode radio art serial about improvisation and spirituality. It blurs, I think, important lines between composition, recording, interview, sonic ethnography, and live performance. So live performance today. I originally thought about doing a more traditional interview style podcast, which is really interesting and fun, but I feel as though I would still come to the same inconclusive conclusions about what improvisation is and can be. So I thought it's great to take off my professor hat and play and be an artist again. And that's what I really appreciate about being a member of this community. There are related works to what I'm going to offer to you today, and I mentioned them because I hope you check them out. Brian Harnedy wrote a piece, I don't know what, a piece of music, an offering. It's a series of audio-visual portraits of people from a very small Appalachian mining town, and it uses archival recordings, video, and images alongside newly composed musics that critically explore issues of extraction, economy, and ecology in the region. It's a fascinating piece, and I'm quite moved by it. As well, Bill Frisell, fantastic guitar player, has a suite of 26 miniatures that are influenced by the photographer Mike Disfarmer, who was born in 1884, and he lived in Heber Springs, Arkansas. And he took thousands of photographs of people in this community that are so stirring and so moving. And he wrote a suite of pieces based on those photographs. So it's both composition, it's improvisation, and also a multisensory experience. And lastly, for now, Jameel Brown, with his work Transcendence. This is a very important record. You should check this out. It's not hip hop influenced by jazz, nor it is jazz music influenced by hip hop. It is some type of dotted line between the two of them. It's a very important work that utilizes field recordings, and it's just a very powerful work. And I can't talk about it anymore because I need to show you my work. This is a photo of me and Ornette Coleman, my favorite musician. When I met Ornette, he said two things. First, he said, music is energy. But then he offered that the subject of what he does is not as important as the quality of what he puts out. And stylistically, he's so diverse that it's sometimes hard and maybe even uncomfortable for some people to approach his music, or indeed anyone who you can't really pin down. And CSRS is full of people who you can't really pin down exactly what they are. So we've sort of found each other in this place. And I think I feel really lucky to share this work with you today in that spirit of risk taking. So I've been collecting sounds all year and cataloging them. I've been writing and recording and improvising music, but most importantly, it's not intended as like supporting music. I'm not writing music or thinking about sound that supports anything, although it may. This is a communal effort from myself, if that makes sense. And this is my timeline of some episodes that I'm going to drop, and you can certainly listen to them individually. I kind of like the idea that they kind of live as a family, and anyone in this room can be involved in this project. Ask me, or I'll certainly invite you. So anytime someone is showing a work in progress, there's always a little bit of risk. I'm not afraid of that. I think it's good to be nervous. I think it's good to know that there's something on the line, and I welcome that very much. But when I talk about music, especially with students, and I know there are some musicians here, but there certainly are not, there's some non-musicians here as well. So in trying to find that magic middle, this is an example that I like to use, especially when talking about improvised music. So when we look at this piece by Mark Rothko, and let's say we don't understand it immediately, we can merely look away and our lives continue on just fine. And then we can come back and look at it again, and our lives continue on just fine. But sometimes with sound, when we use hearing, things, the investment of time and your body alters the experience drastically. Music is only an art in time, in my belief, in a superficial sense. It's perhaps more of the art of surmounting time in time. For instance, our visual sense leaves what we see where it is. It comes to terms with space. It merely looks. Hearing isn't like that. It doesn't acquiesce in time. It hears time, but simultaneously more than time, hearing what is past and what is future as something present. So I witnessed that as according to the demands of several spiritual traditions, certainly Zen, whereby you live in the now because past and future are indeed some type of delusion. So talking about improvisation, talking about being in the moment is really challenging. I'm going to talk about that just for a little bit as a means of grounding this piece that I'll share with you. So probably those of you who've studied music in this room have felt that you can't improvise or you need sheet music to be there. And so the other way, flip side is also true. Perhaps you were in piano lessons and you wanted to alter the melody a little bit, but your teacher was like, no, you have to play exactly what's on the page. And that itself sort of takes you away from what you are. And I can improvise, but I also teach it at an academy, which is a really dumb idea. I mean, I'm glad to have a gig, but like it's a bit weird. I teach people how to be themselves, and then I evaluate them on that. So, and in some traditions, and this will be important for today, like it's easy to hear someone playing a jazz standard, and you can tell if they're playing in tune or in time, if they're nailing the changes, if they've got a nice sound. But you can't always grade their interaction or know if they're connecting, which I think are the really most important things in music. So already you're probably wondering, well, what does this project have to do with spirituality? Well, I would say possibly everything. Improvisation is everywhere. It's so ubiquitous. It's such a part of every human activity. Then perhaps the worst thing that has happened to it is that it has a name at all. That's a cloak I like taking off and just throwing out there. That's something that feel free to disagree. I look forward to the questions, but that's something I feel very passionately about, that I think everything we are doing is improvising, and there's some trouble that goes along with that. So this is important. It's not so much a matter if you can or can't improvise, because I think you are all doing it right now. Like, did you ever hold that exact glass that you just filled your water with? Like, no, I mean, you did very well. I didn't hear any glass smashing anything. Everyone did very, very well doing these things. But where this becomes a problem is it's more of a matter of whether or not what you improvise is good or not good. And that's a problem. That's a big problem. I think that stifles creativity. That doesn't mean that, it's always cool that you have an E natural in a C minor chord. I mean, if you don't know what that is, that can also be a big deal. But I think the more we get caught up in the specifics of style, the less openness there is. And I think that's the most important part of improvisation. Indeed, that's where expectations are born. So here's a little experiment. You can think about, what if you have to create a meal using only food from your fridge door, like just the fridge door. You think about right now, whatever's in your fridge door. People use fridge doors in different ways, of course. But if you're like, oh, it'll be fun. Hey, honey, let's just make a meal just on the fridge door, see what we come up with. Okay, cool. What if you had no other food except what was in your fridge door? That's a very different feeling. It's a very different quality, I would say. And there's nothing on this paper. It just makes it look like I'm reading. Your creativity is constrained, and it's enabled by limits. But Thomas Merton talks about the idea of space between instinct and inspiration, which I take as submitting to a need. And when I improvise, I hate it when people ask me this question, so I'll take care of it now. What do you think about when you play? Well, I think about making the situation better. I think about what is going on in this musical moment. How do I add to it? What can I make it? How do I make this better or best? That is constantly happening. It's not thinking about chords and scales or intonation even. I'm just thinking about what can I possibly make that makes this the best thing possible. So I'm happy to speak about jazz music, but I think it would be great to get at least one other expert. And so we're going to get Bill Evans for about 90 seconds. This is,
I think,
shoot. I'd like to scroll forward. How do I get it to scroll forward? I should have.
I think that
This is improvising here.
jazz very seldom in its true state is presented to the average public. They do have an idea of jazz which is not quite true. But the way I feel about it is that it is the only form of art that, in a way, America has created and given to the world in this century or in the past few centuries, let's say. But I think it's more of a revival in a different form of what went on in classical music before. In other words, in the 17th century, there was a great deal of improvisation in classical music, as you know. And because of the fact that there were no electrical recording techniques or any way to permanize or to catch music and to record it, the music was written so that it could be permanized that way. And so slowly but surely, the writing of the music and the interpreters of the written music gave way to more and more interpretation and more cerebral composition and less improvisation, until finally improvisation became a lost art in classical music, and we have only the composer and the interpreter. So the composer even very seldom improvised, or didn't have to, say around the late 1800s or the turn of the century. But jazz, in a way, has resurrected that process.
This is important.
Which I call the jazz process. Now, jazz, as we tend to look at it, is a style. But I feel that jazz is not so much a style as a process of making music. It's the process of making music, making 1 minute's music in 1 minute's time. Whereas when you compose, you can make 1 minute's music and take 3 months to compose 1 minute's music. Now, that's the only basic difference. Now, it so happens that because of historical circumstances and where jazz was born or whatever came up the Mississippi and American music and the American culture and all, we think of jazz as a stylistic medium now, which in a way it is. But I think we must remember that in an absolute sense, jazz is more of a certain creative process of spontaneity than a style. Therefore, you might say that Chopin or Bach or Mozart or whoever improvised music, that is, was able to make music of the moment, was in a sense playing jazz. And we leave style out of it. And that's the way I feel about it in an absolute sense.
That was just slightly longer than I intended, but I think it's quite important. Sometimes I interchange jazz and improvisation because of that idea that it is a process. I think that process is what makes it important beyond music. Far beyond it, actually. And then this Winton quote is important to me as well. Jazz also reminds you that you can work things out with other people. It's hard, but it can be done. When a group of people try to invent something together, there's bound to be a lot of conflict. Jazz urges you to accept the decisions of others. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, but you can't give up no matter what. It's the art of negotiating change with style. The aim of every performance is to make something out of whatever happens, to make something together and be together. So there's loads of ways to experience this. So very briefly, I'll talk about experiencing improvisation in very relatable ways. This entire list, which purposefully has dying before camping, because I really don't like camping, but camping. Camping is an excellent analogy, because if you forget something, you have to improvise, or you don't have all the ingredients in something you need to make, or you go hiking and you get lost and you use your sense. You sense your way back. You're cooking. How much is a smidge? We don't really know. You're driving or walking to work, and it's not the exact same route every day. And I think those things are really important. Or another really easy way to think about improvisation is on a crosswalk. This is Shinjuku Station, but it could be anywhere. When all of those people are walking towards you and you are walking towards them, there's this wonderful micromanaged choreography that's at play that, you know, if you bump into somebody, if your shoulders touch, even in 2022, it's not the end of the world. You will keep going. You are part of this process of continuing, regardless of what's happening. Conversation gets talked about a lot in terms of improvisation. Think of a time when you're at a party, somebody, and maybe even today, someone, perhaps you're overhearing two people speak about something, you wish to interject something. By the time it becomes sensible for you to contribute something, their subject has changed, perhaps someone spills something or just anything happens, you get called away. And then do you follow through with that original idea or not? Do you hold back? And also very interesting thinking about hearing, I talked about a second ago, with conversation, which this isn't yet. There's the idea that you just hear it once, and even if you don't totally get it, you keep going. Certainly you could ask someone to repeat something, but already that's different. You stay with what's happening, which I think is a very spiritual experience. So when I'm working with students, and this is also kind of how I conceive of improvising, there's a couple steps, and I've limited to 3 to offer you today, of how to not sound like anybody else. That's an important feature of improvising, in the sense that you want to provoke, and that can be done instantly by your individuality. So in the beginning, I'm using a royal we, excuse me, but we want to sound like how we want to sound like. I'm a kid, I'm growing up in Newfoundland, I hear these sounds on the radio, I want to sound like Kevin Turcotte, I want to sound like Guido Basso, my trumpet idols. So these are just a short list of some folks that I really liked when I was a young person, and I still love it all. And I find that music that you listen to in high school is the stuff that really stays with you. It's the stuff that, like, right now, I don't even need to listen to this music anymore. It's like it is in me already. It's there. It's a weird thing. I don't feel about it every piece of music, but I feel about it, the music that I listened to ravenously as a child, which I've ultimately given up. Yes, it's still in me, as I said, but if you want to cultivate an original voice, you really must turn your back on those sounds that you really, really love, lest it just become overt copying, which goes against, I think, the vibe that your individuality is valued. So then painful step number 2 is to take apart your playing, listen to yourself, listen to those phrases, listen to those gestures, sounds, the way you approach certain musical situations, and just understand what you are. Not judge yet, that's step 3. So you turn inward and then say, all right, what are these things that are me that mean the most to me? How do I build my own improvisational identity from that point of view? And going back to Ornette, who is so strident, he's not strident, he's amazing, but he has so many personalities, and yet it is still Ornette. It is still that one person. Ditto for Bill Evans or Miles Davis or lots of folks. So it's in a very small nutshell. Happy to expand on this later. That's how I create an improviser, because that's the experience I share with younger improvisers. It seems to bear some fruit. This is important too, and it is certainly easy to forget. The only thing a listener needs from you is to sound good. They don't need you to sound like anybody else. They've ironed their pants. They're having dinner early. They got a babysitter. They're coming out to hear you play. And those who think, and if you think like, oh, they hate me already, then you've already lost. Like you can't even go down that path. And it's also the same when you're a listener. Rare is the person who's listening for something to be terrible. I mean, the guys on the Muppet Show, I know Tim Gosley's here. I shouldn't talk about the Muppet Show so flippantly, but still, unless you're those guys on the Muppet Show, then that's it. And this last thing is very important for a young musician to consider as well. And I'm standing by it today, especially. Someone else's opinion of your art is none of your business. It doesn't work in comedy, but at least then you're waiting for someone else's reaction. Does become your business, I suppose. So these are important things. And lastly, before I play some music for you, you've been a great audience, is even if you can't play music, I do suspect everyone here has probably held a pen. So learning to draw is like learning to improvise. And there are some, I think some things worth just briefly examining in one game I'll share with you. So there's similarly beliefs around beliefs about learning to draw. Nice. Well done, Patrick. Drawing is about what you see either by your eye or in your imagination. You see it here and then you try to get it out. I have a sound in my mind that is me that I want to get out. And sometimes people are either say themselves, "Oh, I can't draw. My drawing sucks," you know, or they've been told that you can't draw. That's an interesting one. Same with music. We were talking about that earlier today. Having your own style is really important when one draws. I remember too, you know, showing a drawing I'm really proud of to someone, and then when I was a kid, and then they say, "Oh, you just traced that." Like, well, you're seeing the process. Like, don't you still see that this is beautiful? Like, I'm still a kid. I'm learning. I'm just tracing. Goes back to those steps. Like, it's cool to like things and know what you like and incorporate them. So we instantly get caught up in what is good and what's bad straight away. So I want to teach you this game. You can do this later, but there's a fun game you can play called Bird or Dog. Straven's probably awesome in this game. So player one draws a single random line on a chalkboard or whiteboard, whatever. And then player two just draws a picture of a bird or dog out of that line. So it's easy for us to see this. This is where sight beats ears, because it's a quick thing that you can experience what this might be like. So I took the liberty of drawing a couple random lines. All right, so you look at these lines. They're random-ish, I guess, if I drew them. And then you can fill them in and they become either birds or dogs instantly. So if you want to see column A, here's what they were. This probably means much more to the folks on Zoom. And then this. So it's a fun thing. So I'll play some music for you in just a moment, but the central reason for what I'm offering you sonically today is summed up in these two questions. Well, slightly more than two questions. The $64 question that I'm interested in, and perhaps some of you scholars are too. When I improvise, on what basis is my playing merely an iteration of the learned patterns indicative to the particular musical style, and on what basis am I generating spontaneous new utterances? Extending from that, does the newness come from me or does it happen to me? Am I aware of the newness, including that which is coming perhaps from myself? These are spiritual considerations that I love, and it's the thing that earlier today I was talking. You know, this is the stuff that I'm excited to get to work at and to, you know, mull as I hear you guys talking on coffee chats. The €64 question is perhaps more interesting, which is $49 Canadian. If improvisation exists at the intersection of intent and circumstance, between what one meant to do and what actually occurred, how then are errors perceived and negotiated in improvised collaborative situations? Or what do you do when something goes wrong? It's an ultimate spiritual question, if there ever was one, I suppose. And what can you muster? What's already in you? What of those steps, if you've even considered any, not even those, can you take into this situation? How do you even perceive the wrongness? Which is interesting. So what does this have to do with music or this sort of radio serial that I've conceived? Well, I'm moved to make something that I've never made before. I've never made any kind of music or sound like what I'm about to offer you today. And so, which is interesting because while my life is not in danger, it is an interesting thing to care about if it's good. Because I kind of do today. It's a weird feeling. It's not super comfortable, I would even say, but that's fine. So what is the point of what I'm playing for you? I'm not sure. And it is an excerpt, and there will be more to this, but there are aspects of it that I really like a lot so far. And it's helping me in ways that just reading texts or listening to music or even being around other musicians and just playing, it's helping me come to terms with what am I actually aware of in music? What am I aware of with other people? So that's been a really fun journey. So recognizing fully that we're in a room here and I'm about to hit play and some electronic music will play, and it's not really that thrilling, I know. There is a live music component to this as well. I will perform sort of with this recording at a specific point. I want to thank some fantastic vocal help, notably Paige helped with this, which is really cool. It's 8 minutes long. and I'm going to play it now. I hope it works on the Zoom. I think Rachel has a link in the event it doesn't work, or feel free to drop the link in the chat anyway. So I thank you. This sort of concludes my presentation once I hit play. I really do appreciate your attention, and I welcome any feedback, critical or otherwise, about anything I've offered, which is, circling a hodgepodge, I would say, but at its core is developing relationships in time that are trying to help each other be better. Oh, that's a gross sentence, and this is recorded forever, but it is a work in progress, and I should just shut up and play it. I think that's what I ought to do. So.
Everything is right in God's world.
Yes.
And so any sort of spirituality, like I'm an Aquarius, and therefore these are the types of things that I get up to, because and then it will inspire me to have confidence to do those types of things, because I know that everything is right in God's world. I know that I am acting with God. Therefore, when I try and build a chair or say hello to my neighbor, I know that we're all in God's favor. We're doing God's. God is with me. Therefore, I have the confidence to act. I have the confidence to try something. Obviously, the flip side of that is when I see things that, it's like when I see music that I don't like. Well, that is the devil's music, because I don't like it. And since I am supported by God, anything I don't like must also be evil.
None of you are God. And therefore none of you are good. God calls sin an abomination. Man calls sin a blunder. God calls sin blindness. Man calls sin a chance. God calls sin a choice. Man calls sin a defect. God calls sin a disease. Man calls sin an error. God calls sin enmity. Man calls sin fascination. God calls sin vitality. Man calls sin infirmity. God calls sin iniquity. Man calls sin luxury. God calls sin leprosy. Man calls sin liberty. God calls sin lawlessness. Man calls sin a trifle. God calls sin a tragedy. Man calls sin a mistake. God calls sin madness. Man calls sin a weakness. God calls sin willfulness. Oh, how serious it is to be a sinner.
You ever throw out most of your cutlery because you don't think you're going to ever dine with anyone else again? Yeah, that's where I am. Yeah.
Acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me, and I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens in God's world by mistake.
Saint Gregory Nazianzen calls the soul of the spiritual man, the mystic, an instrument played by the Holy Spirit, organum pulsatum a spiritu sancto. The Holy Ghost draws from this instrument harmonies and a melody of which reason and the will of man alone could never even dream. It is this music vibrating on the well-tuned strings of a perfect human personality that makes a man a saint. It is when special harmonies are wrung from a human instrument that the Holy Ghost makes a man a contemplative.
Did you hear that?
What part has reason in this silent song that God sings for himself and for his elect in the soul of a mystic? It is the function of reason not to play the instrument, but only to tune the strings. The master himself does not waste time tuning the instrument. He shows his servant reason how to do it and leaves him to do the work. If he then comes and finds the piano still out of tune, he does not bother to play anything on it. He strikes a chord and goes away. The trouble generally is that the tuner has been banging on the keys himself all day without bothering to do the work assigned to him, which is to keep the thing in tune.
So religion is improvisation within the structure of psychological interaction with the world, with death, with, so it's... Maybe there is bad, but there is a shelter. There is a psychological shelter, just like we need houses for the physical shelter.
Yes.
We need places where we can put our psychological shelter.
Yes, yes.
Because we also can't just spend all day worrying. Like, we can't spend all day just worrying that, the tiger's gonna come out and get me. Mm-hmm. We need to plot out and go, okay, these streets are safe, or this person is safe, or this action is safe, so that I can let my guard down a little. And so religion and spirituality allow us to do that by creating a cosmology. Well, cosmology, but then also cosmogony is the birth of the... yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Patrick.
Can I just say thank you? I mean, captive audience and speakers there, so you did great. I didn't see anyone totally running away, but maybe you felt it, so I really deeply appreciate your listening. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay. Questions, comments? I've got one. That's not fair. So one of my colleagues, Shema Boyle, oh, there he is. He said, you always ask that question that takes, 20 minutes to answer, but it's you ask it at like 2 minutes before the end. So I'm going to ask it earlier. By way of a preface, I would say one of the things I've appreciated the most about this artist in residence program is that it's brought into the center people who do all kinds of things. We've had installation art, we've had conceptual art, we've had digital art, we've had poetry, novels, all kinds of things, puppetry, sort of sacred biography, all kinds of wonderful things. And one of the things I appreciate then about the final artist talk that happens always at the end is that it's not the same as a lecture, right? Where you present kind of an argument, evidence, conclusions, future research, all the standard repertoire of that particular performance, you could say, in our context. And one of the things I love about what you did and what Straven did as well is that it didn't have that kind of argument, conclusion kind of structure. And yet, I think it's often the case that it's possible for the artist to also situate their activity, the kind of core dilemma they're pursuing within a kind of a framework, right? And so, you're interested in improvisation. What I wonder if you could situate it against a backdrop of, I know you have an interest in spirituality, yoga, and I think Buddhism is also an interest of yours, which you alluded to in your talk. I wonder if you make sense of your work against that backdrop. John Cage is an obvious person who was kind of, for me, kind of a ghost.
Totally.
In your presentation. I just wonder if you could tease that out a little bit.
Sure.
And I pose that question in the same way I posed it to Straven at the end, and unfairly too late, I think. But I think it's interesting to sort of see you, it would be interesting to see you situate that against a broader capital R religious, capital S spiritual context.
Yeah, so funny you mentioned Cage, because just as I was sort of sitting here with my head down, wondering, like, I hope they like it, which is something that probably Cage never once or very rarely would have considered as he decided to dismantle structures, decided to tangentially reimagine what a concert or what a piece of music is. So I feel as though what I'm a part of, or what I'm, if I could put it in a framework, it would probably be how do we get the actual sounds to get us closer to each other, which I know is not a framework, but I'll improvise the answer now. I spend so much time dealing with people who are interested in exactly what something is. Can you tell me what scale to play over a specific chord is? What is going to work? And I don't think any of that works. I think that's great for understanding what that style is, but what is really central to, if not the piece I just offered, but the idea of improvising, is that it gets us out of what is supposed to be and into what is. So that's where certainly any meditation practice I have of mine gets me closer to. And at the same time, I can't stand being with musicians who are similarly not as interested in that moment, and not in terms of like creating that together. So it's a question I struggle with. I thought that you might even ask it based on the during the break, and I tried not to think about an answer because I don't have one. Yeah, I feel so strongly about, and I really do get like emotionally attached to playing with people who are reckless, who are recklessly open to what is about to be, which does eliminate some type of frameworks, but no framework is still a framework. No rules in improvisation is still a rule of sorts. So I think I've tap danced around the answer enough. I'm sorry. I do struggle with that though.
Yeah. I wonder if there's some similarity between your improvisation just now
Mhm.
and Estraven's observation that, the outcome of the weaving isn't the basket, it's the experience, right? So that there is the now of that 3-hour experience or 3-day experience,
Mhm.
that's the goal of the artistic moment.
I would hope, but that has many business implications in the sense that there's not a lot of people who are interested in hanging out for a bunch of guys and girls who are playing just for each other, which is interesting in itself. So the expectation of an audience is unfortunately something that does come up. And this meaning teaching improvisation in an academy has a lot to do with that too. And that could be ceaselessly disappointing to some students.
Anne?
Hello. Oh, sorry. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Patrick.
Hey, how's it
Thank you
going?
so much.
Thank you so much for listening.
I was a fellow, God, so long ago, 2004. So share your love of the center and the kind of collaborative space that it is, and too rare in the academic environments. So your talk made me think of so many things. So I've dabbled in Zen, and my husband Simon is quite a serious Zen practitioner. I had to quit Zen because I found it too hard, honestly, but I've continued to watch his progress and his interactions. And when you describe this idea of teaching people about your true self and then evaluating it, that kind of sounds like what Simon and I did very not well in the Dokusan room. So here, show me your true self. The koan is about showing, not about explaining. And so that, that really rang with me. And I also really appreciated the way you mentioned other activities like cooking. I find conversation very improvisational.
Entirely.
And specifically, I'm a physician and I work in addiction medicine, and I also work in physician health. So I have the privilege of having very long conversations with physicians who have some form of distress, mental, physical, emotional pain. And that's what leads them to call me. I've only been doing this work for 6 months and I absolutely love it. I feel like it's like somehow I landed in my dream job. And when I think of what I love so much about these conversations I have with physician colleagues, it's that they feel so creative. It's like I get to draw on, I was telling Martin Adam here, like I can draw on Buddhism and Christianity and music and art. So now, I used to do inner city medicine and addiction medicine, and my treatment plans were kind of the treatment plans you expect doctors to have. And now my treatment plans are like, I send them podcasts and book recommendations, and something between us has sparked something. And it's kind of magical. And that's why I love my job so much. So I guess if there's a question in here, I'm really curious about music, because from the mystical perspective, right? So having something like a mystical experience, like a Kensho or a Satori, I think it's well documented in the religious studies literature that these experiences can come through a lot of training. So you've sat and sat and sat.
Right.
But they can also be given in a moment. Like, we had a researcher at the center who was like, his research was like middle-aged housewives in England who would have a Kensho-like experience while vacuuming, And so I wonder if in the world of music, there are examples, recorded or unrecorded examples of musical people or people who are not musically trained, but then have these flashes of insight and make brilliant music. Have you ever witnessed that? I'm curious about that. And I'm also curious, I really liked what you said about how you're really drawn to collaborating with people who are recklessly vulnerable. And so am I, in the worlds of medicine and other areas that I'm in. I see that so much as a spiritual practice, and it was so much like the first vocal recording. I don't know who it was, but I feel like that person nailed it when they said, because I am loved, I can't do anything wrong. I feel like I literally said that to another physician last night. I'm in this women's leadership course, And a big thing for some reason that women leaders struggle with is taking up too much space. And this female physician who is amazing, but has been told all her life she takes up too much space. She says, how can I know if I'm taking too much space or if I'm shrinking? And I said, I won't say her name, but I was like, you can do no wrong. You're absolutely wonderful. So what if you take up too much space and piss some people off? You know, the worst thing that could happen is you'd come back and apologize, right? And I have to say that understanding has come to me through contemplative practice. This sense of like, if one is deeply loved, however one comes to that understanding, then you're free to improvise in whatever domain of life you're in. So I wonder, I guess another question would be, in the areas of music, do you find that the people you enjoy working with, who are those reckless improvisers, they have come to that knowing of being beloved in some way?
Wow, thanks. I mean, that's worth the whole term.
Sorry, that's a lot of
No,
questions.
it's fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. First, to your Kensho question, have I experienced or witnessed, or can I regale of a story? No is the answer, but I can say that in situations that I have personally been in, whereby and it will relate to the second part of what you said, when I've been in situations whereby we are performing regularly or rehearsing regularly with the same people in a reckless improvisational manner, if I might say that, we are really listening to one another, not necessarily thinking so much of style, although sometimes we may attach ourselves to it. The nerd word for this would be non-genre specific improvisation or non-idiomatic improvisation. I am in a group that meets very regularly like that, and occasionally I feel as though there are moments of just, where is this coming from? This is great, but that might not exactly be what you're talking about in terms of a sudden flash. I do know these people and I feel comfortable, I feel loved around these people. So that may actually factor into a more consistent feeling of, this is where I should be in my life, playing with these people, because we are making our own style right now. And then you're talking to your colleagues and supporting them. You are creating your own style. You are creating your own, I don't know if this is the right word, use the word habitus, but you're creating your own, you're creating your own band. You're supporting each other with the licks and riffs that you think would be best for that moment, and allowing those people to be the best of themselves. You're creating that condition, and you're doing that, to the second part of your question, through listening. The power that exists in someone being listened to cannot be put on a test, and yet it's the most important thing. It's so much easier to talk about, play these notes, this is the history of the music that you should know, and that is important. I'm not trying to disparage it, but how can we teach someone that it's important to listen very closely to the other person, and indeed what is just happening anyway? Which means being comfortable with silence, which means being comfortable with uncertainty, which means being accepting of the thoughts that come by as you're trying to not think of any thoughts, which is entirely a part of my non-musical life. So yeah, to me, there should be just a whole school of music for just that is not caught up in stylistic parameters specifically. Because I think that is what is the most beautiful. That's the most beautiful thing about just being alive, I would even say. God, it's a bit deep here, but it's true. When you don't have to go looking for value, when you just feel it, when you just know it's great, there's just a knowing that this group of people is so great, or this process that we're sharing is so excellent. That's really quite vital. I'd love to talk to you more about maybe, because you have a great voice too. You'd be fun to include in this project. We'll perhaps chat later.
We can set that up. She's a neighbor.
Excellent, wonderful.
So, and a friend. Sepide.
Hi, Patrick.
Hello.
That was fantastic. I just feel privileged to be at the receiving end of that.
Privilege is mine. Thank you.
While I was listening to your music, and by hearing to what you said about you wanting us to like the piece. And by the experience I was having as I listened to that music, I was wondering, are you interested in and committed to creating that spiritual, rule-less experience for yourself as the artist as you're making the art, or the spiritual experience of your audience? And does that distinction matter?
Would you mind just taking another, could you please repeat just the last little part of it? I want to make sure I get everything, please.
Yes. So as an artist, are you interested in the spiritual experience that you have while you're making the art? Or are you interested in the spiritual experience that your audience has?
Gotcha.
And does that distinction matter at all?
Yeah, that's a really important question.
Great question.
Okay, be honest, Patrick. No, I'm not interested in the spiritual. I'm not interested in the audience. And the reason is this. That's what starts the stories. That's what takes me away from everything else that I am trying to do on the front end, which is I am concerned about the spiritual. I'm concerned with my spiritual practice as a musician, deeply so, to the point that I don't actually call practicing music practicing. I call it service. I say to my students, they think I'm crazy, but this is music. You're just serving the music. If you take care of the music, it takes care of you. That's a direct quote from John Wire. Weird, channeling John. No, but I don't want to say that I don't care about what an audience experiences. I would certainly not want to hurt one. I'm trying to create a situation such that we can share, and I'm hoping that people would be interested in what is happening. But I find it goes too far the other way, where we do get, we as music teachers, we're preparing students for specific concerts where the chairs all face the stage, which is not the only place where music exists. As John Cage pointed out, music is a how. Music is it's not just a what. It's it is everywhere. And even just getting a student or anyone to just listen to the sound in this room right now, I hope it's interesting. Let's listen to it for 5 seconds. It's almost soothing, and especially hearing other people listening is a fantastic feeling. So if I could perform in such a way that we are all engaging in that, that helps. And I can even get into that to the point where I'm not even caring if you like it or not, but I am interested if you're really listening and caring about us all listening together. I should write part of that down. That's actually quite interesting. Yeah. Interesting.
Don't forget it's being taped.
Oh, fabulous.
So that's well taken care of. So we only have time for one more question, but it's going to come from Shema Boyle.
Hi.
You kind of touched on it in that final question answer. And I have lots of thoughts and my mind is running, so I'm not sure I can say it as concisely as I want to, but maybe one way to get at what I want to ask is that it seems to me that there's, and to go back to Straven's presentation, that there's, you know, the moment that she talked about the basket weavers working together, singing together, and that kind of musical spirituality that comes from a group thing, and what you're talking about. Basically, what I'm wanted to ask about is this emphasis on the individual voice that you, because so much of what you talked about is about working with other musicians too, but then you come back to the individual mattering.
Yeah,
so
right.
I wanted to ask about why the individual matters.
So interesting. Yeah, it matters because some people would say that improvisation, building on the last question, is all about listening. And we just indeed just did that. We just listened to see what was happening, and then I interrupted it by moving on. But indeed, you do have to have something to say if you're going to improvise. There needs to be something to be listened to if we're going to gather and make that music together in a way that isn't purely soloist and support, which is also great. That's why we have rhythm sections. It's a wonderful thing to experience the real roles of what a set of instruments can do. But there needs to be a provocative individual voice to come to terms with the decisions of other people. The fact that there might be something going on that you need to change, and you need to have enough of a self sense to perhaps contribute to that, or at least take control of it. This is a really interesting point to me anyway. The idea that even if you don't know what to play, there's a mindset you can inhabit, a simple one of, am I leading, am I following, or am I accompanying the action? I know I'm saying I all those times, but even if the other musicians are not aware that I am feeling that I am leading, following, or accompanying the action, well, already there's some type of context which can uplift a group or change it, or change a dynamic, or provoke it in a very interesting way, and might even get to the people who aren't listening to you, at least in the way that you wish. So ideally though, to your specific question, you'd be playing with people who are all interested in the music being between the people and not just coming from a person. Like we are keeping this aloft like a beach ball or something. That's the most, and that's why Miles Davis's groups are so essential. You listen to Miles Davis live in Tokyo in 1964, the tune Walkin'. I mean, yeah, it's a blues, but man, it's so much more than that. It's 5 people just talking through music, and it's complex and nuanced, and yet totally relatable, and probably often wrong. Like there's probably lots of wrong notes or things that don't necessarily jive with the form, and yet it is so stimulating. And those are 5, very deep personalities, very distinct voices that work together. And they work together because they can find situations that aren't working. It's not all just harmony giving each other back rubs. Like there has to be some amount of tension or low level panic in music at all time for it to be urgent. You have to be nervous, otherwise it's not worth doing. There has to be something to push against, and it's a little personal for me, but that's how I feel about it.
That's a great answer to a fabulous question. And that brings us to the end of this evening. So just a little reminder, next week is our final lecture of our series. It's also a special lecture in the sense that Cheyenne is the Indigenous Arts and Research Fellow this year. And so please join us next week online for that final talk. And please join me now to thank Patrick and Estraven for their great talks.